A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
The market pressure tech companies face to bring new luxuries to our communities over the internet has brought with it many initially unforeseen dangers. These dangers are felt by communities in Australia and around the world, from fraud to financial scams to child grooming to identity theft and many other out-of-the-box problems. None in our communities are more exposed than our children. The Australian Federal Government have conducted a controversial trial to severely restrict children on the internet, and the results are in. Here to discuss these results now is Rob Norman from the Australian Christian Lobby, and he'll also share with us an update from the recent 2025 Australian Mayors Summit against anti-Semitism. Welcome to 2020 today, Rob Norman.
Tosh, always good to come on and to share what's going on around the place. These are two big issues.
It's great to have you with us, mate. We're really looking forward to what your thoughts are on these two big issues. And starting here with the online trial and the ban for the young ones, what can you share with us about the results that have just come in?
Yeah, Tosh, this is a case where just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do that particular thing. And so the trial that we're talking about, they tested about 50 different technologies, 50 or 60 technologies from 48 vendors, methods such as facial recognition, ID-based verification, age inference, and so even hand gesture and biometric methods were used and tested. And the findings were that obviously they can determine a child's age through those methods. The problem we have, Tosh, is whether they should be used, because they open up a Pandora's box of issues, obviously. And the big issue here is the keeping of data, the storage of data, and the second one is the role of parents. So do we want a state that's controlling the access that our children have to the internet, or should our parents be involved in that? I think that's a rhetorical question to a large extent. And so this trial has checked all those different areas and come to the conclusion that, of course, we can check age verification. And so now this is scheduled to be implemented at the end of this year, which will affect, social platforms from YouTube to Facebook to TikTok, etc. So that's where we are, Tosh.
It sounds all well and good on the surface. Let's protect our children online, but there's a dystopian undercurrent sitting in there. Does that mean that this could lead to government overreach?
Yeah, it definitely can. And even with the best intentions, and even if the current government has the best intentions, and we leave that for people to make their own decision on that, that doesn't mean that future governments won't have access to the sort of data that we don't particularly want them to. The other thing is we're not sure of third parties, what other groups might have access to children's data. This is just a very scary situation. So we're cautioning. The ACL is saying, let's just slow this thing down. Let's pump the brakes. Let's make sure that parents are involved and that we get the very best outcome for children.
If you could just bring our listeners in a little bit, perhaps with the mechanics of this on an individual basis, does that mean that every phone or computer that is going to be accessing the internet will have to do some sort of preliminary sweep to see if the user is a minor? Is that the kind of ideas that could potentially or would potentially be an everyday reality?
It's a moving target, Tosh, because we have so many different technologies available at the moment, to the point where, for instance, the child or the person who is applying for the social connection, their computer camera could be available, for instance, to scan their face, to take facial recognition. It could be a matter of mobile phone doing that, and people have probably done that with MyGov and the government IDs, etc. But this would be potentially in the hands of agencies where data is not so safe. So it could be offshore, it could be outsourced.
Wow.
The very nature of the trial has shown us that there are 53 organisations where this testing has taken place, with so many technologies and vendors involved, that as technology changes, the legislation would struggle to keep up with that. And so that's a real concern.
In Australia and other nations as well, there's been huge hacks of government infrastructure where data is housed, and with financial institutions having people's private details leaked. Has there been much discussion around cybersecurity with such invasive methods of data surveillance?
Yeah, so the trial has really not gone to that sort of depth. It has scratched the surface, but it's been more a trial as to whether we can do it. And I think everybody knew that we could do it before the trial started. So age verification is not a new thing. It's something that it already happens in gambling situations with apps and so forth. Probably not to this extent, but this really is a minefield of now where do we go from this? How is it implemented? And how do we regulate that data? And as you rightly identify, any online data is open to hacking. And so this is a real problem. Very interesting. As you say, it has a dystopian overview. We should be afraid of this. I think parents need to engage with their local MPs and really express their concern about it.
And what kind of potential for government overreach comes through this kind of unfettered access?
Well, if data is kept on the cloud or in storage, they can then monitor children in all sorts of situations. So you've got facial recognition software. This is like Back to the Future. We're looking at the kinds of things that we've seen for years predicted through Hollywood coming to pass, where people can be surveilled throughout their life, wherever they're walking, wherever they are, that potentially, because of online validation, or people wherever they go can basically be surveilled. And this applies to kids, to anyone basically that has an online account. And
going into the question there about, these third-party potential people with the data, we know that there's been lots of stories about big tech in the past and their involvement with individuals. There is some conversation about these companies potentially being able to usurp parental rights. What can you tell us about that?
Well, parental rights are parental rights, and no one else can substitute for that. The concern that we have is that once companies have the data, we're out of control. Parents are out of control at that point. The data is no longer theirs. So we would strongly advocate for the kind of system, if there is to be this system implemented, which it looks like it will be, where there is no storage of data, where there is a scan or whatever the situation, the validation takes place and data isn't stored, because from then on in, the parent is out of control. And so we think it's very important that at all checkpoints moving forward, there is parental consent of some description.
And when it comes to the appraisals of the data that's being examined or gone through by these different agencies, what do we know about how accurate their interpretations of the actual people being, as you say, surveilled or briefed or looked over? How do we know how they are? Are they accurately really able to give a clear example of what a person's thinking, or do they have certain classifications that are going to kind of make the average everyday person fit their qualifications rather than accurately read where the average everyday person is?
Yeah, well, so we're looking at age, the ability to discern or to measure someone's age. The technology is quite accurate. However, there is a degree of error as well. It's probably a small percentage of errors that would creep into this. So there will be people that will be denied access because the age verification process hasn't worked necessarily well. And there will potentially be children admitted to sites who shouldn't be there because they're not at that age. Now, we all know that not every kid is the same. So if you do a facial scan and there's facial hair, for instance, there are many young guys that I've seen that have beards in high school, under 16. And so there are potential issues in that respect where people are denied access. And then there are the other issue of kids getting access to sites they shouldn't do that are too young. So, yes, there is definitely that error. We think it's in the low percentage kind of range, but nonetheless it's there.
So if a child does get access to a site, they may paint a beard on their face, I don't know, but let's say they do. They get through the guardrails. They would then really be responsible only to the tech company. That tech company would see them as a private citizen, and there'd be no way for a parental intervention. Is that correct?
That's correct. And look, we know that kids are going to find a way around this. Technology will find a way around it ultimately. And so there is the concern also that many have raised that this could drive children to the dark web, where there are even worse pitfalls and so forth. There are ways of breaking technology. We know that. The hackers are using it. A lot of those hackers are actually children as well. So, look, this is a Pandora's box, obviously, and it really requires that we go slowly.
And historically, as society has progressed, it's always been parents that have had authority over children until the children can stand on their own 2 feet. This creep that is happening toward state having responsibility over children, where does the ACL stand and see Christian values here in this creep of government authority over children?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Look, in all the states, Tosh, we are looking at parental rights. We're looking at potential parental rights bills that would give parents more control over their children, more access to their data, the ability to intervene in their schooling, etc. And this is another example of that. So it would be a far simpler process for parents to have the final say, for parents or guardians to allow or disallow access for their children to the internet. That would be a much more sensible thing. And that's not out of the question, but we need to advocate for it. We need parents to talk to their local MP to make sure they're involved in the process. Otherwise, these things just keep slipping under the radar.
And so, to your knowledge, was there any inclusion of parental oversight in the recent tests that were done?
Not to my knowledge. Again, Tosh, my understanding here is that the scope of the trial was to determine whether we can use these means and methods for determining someone's age. And so, of course, the answer is yes. There is an error margin. Whether or not that's acceptable, that's for others to decide. But to my knowledge, there was no check for parental rights, which would be a very simple one, obviously.
Yeah, the concept of governmental oversight and the creep of mandate is one that we always do need to be watchful for. So we'd really encourage the members out there in Australia and in the Pacific and beyond, but particularly here in this land where we can, to reach out to our local members. What kind of advice would you give and what kind of issues to speak about when reaching out to the local member to speak your concerns about this?
Well, look, I think it's really important for everyone, particularly in the Christian community, that we have relationship with our local MP. And that's not a partisan statement. It doesn't matter who your local MP or what side of politics they're on. It is a good thing just to get to know them, to find out where they sit, and to have an ongoing conversation, particularly if you're a parent. If you have kids in that age group, it is our job, firstly, to intervene. And sometimes the state intervenes when parents don't, and so we mustn't let that void be left.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, they are our children and they are our responsibility, right?
That's it. Absolutely.
And Rob, what can you share with us about the recent 2025 Australian Mayor's Summit Against Anti-Semitism?
Tosh, this was a great event, a big event on the Gold Coast, I should say. Many people didn't even know that it was taking place, but it was a massive event. It was hosted by Mayor Tom Tate, and it included 250 mayors and councillors from across the nation to look at the issue of anti-Semitism and how that can be addressed at a local government level. So we had two of the largest Jewish constituencies, the Glen Ira Council in Victoria that encompasses Caulfield and those areas in the southeast of Melbourne. Now, in that area, you've got a 17.2% Jewish population. It also involved the Waverley city precinct in New South Wales in eastern Sydney. And here you've got a 16% constituency of Jewish people. But then there were councillors who came from Mount Isa, where there are virtually zero, I think 0.1% of a Jewish constituency in Mount Isa. And so they came together, all with the same purpose, to be proactively addressing issues that surround anti-Semitism. And there's unfortunately, a growing movement across the world of anti-Semitism that, if not addressed, potentially runs out of control. So the list of dignitaries at this event, Tosh, was huge. Tom Tate, we had Israel's ambassador to Australia, the Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, spoke. We had the Mayor of Beverly Hills,
wow,
Sharona Nazarian. There was a long list.
And you mentioned that it was a large event, 250 mayors. Is this an ongoing event, or was this a standalone event?
Yeah, it's the first of its kind in Australia. My understanding is that it will be ongoing. This has already been happening in the US, and it's very specifically aimed at educating people, making them aware of things like the Holocaust museums, of which we have in most of our capital cities in Australia, ensuring that children are educated in the history of anti-Semitic behaviour, and particularly in Second World War, and then flowing through to the October events of 2023.
And Rob, we've got about a minute to go. What kind of advice would you give to the average parent out there who really may not have spent much time sharing with the children about the Holocaust or about the Jewish plight around the world, with anti-Semitism being the way it is? What resources would you point them toward?
Well, the Holocaust Museum is probably the first point of call. And again, this requires parental oversight. But here in Brisbane, where I'm based, there is a Holocaust Museum. There's one in Sydney. There's one in Melbourne. There's one in Adelaide. There's one in Perth. They're really growing in their outward-facing efforts. So I would encourage parents to get involved in that. I'd encourage parents to direct their kids towards history, because history tends to repeat itself. The events of October 7 are not standalone. That was a horrific event, and some of the detail of the victims that are still playing out, we can easily research. So I'd encourage parents to direct their children towards that. We don't ever want to see these things breaking out in large scale, Tosh. And unfortunately, as one of the survivors spoke to us at this event, we're seeing very similar markers as took place pre-World War II.
Well, that's very concerning, a concern for all parents out there and citizens of Australia as well. Thank you, Rob Norman, for coming and sharing your time with us today on 2020.
That's my pleasure, Tosh. Have a great day.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.